line on the sidewalk, that's the Freedom Trail. It's 2.5 miles long. It starts on the Common, and it goes all the way to the Bunker Hill Monument in Charlestown. It's 16 monuments of the American Revolution.
What does that sound for?
It's a nice walk. You know, if you're looking for something to do, if it's a nice day. Take an Uber home, though. You know, you don't want to walk 5 miles. Not even for history, I don't think. You don't want to walk 5. 2.5 is all right. This is the Park Street Church on the right. They used to call it Brimstone Corner because the ministers would come out onto the pulpit, harangue the people with a lot of fire and brimstone. Good Calvinist preaching. The Common on the right, Boston Common, 1634. The oldest public park in America, except it wasn't a park originally. You know, the Puritans would have never started a park. They would have thought that was frivolous. I can imagine what they would have said about duck tours. You know, I think we'd all be in the stocks, probably. But it was the cow pasture originally. It was the common grazing area. You could bring your cow here if your cow was hungry. The British soldiers were quartered here at the beginning of the Revolution. 5,000 British soldiers on the Common. The biggest event on the Common was in 1979. Pope John Paul II came to Boston, you know, His Holiness. His first stop in America was here in Boston, and he had Mass on the Common for almost 500,000 people back in 1979. That's the Boylston Street subway station on the right, also on the corner too. That's Boylston Street. That's part of the Green Line today, but it's the oldest subway station in the United States, in the whole country. 1897. Boston had the first subway in America. There were too many trolley cars on Tremont Street. You know, it was too congested. So they put the trolleys underground to get them off the street. They put them under the Common. So the original subway went from Boylston Street to Park Street. That was it. That was the whole system. One stop, each direction. They made it bigger eventually. But it's the oldest one in the United States. I think New York let us win. New York could have had the first subway. Anybody from New York?
Right here.
There we are, in the back. They could have had the first subway, but they decided to go with the elevated trains instead, you know, the above ground. They thought that was safer and cheaper, so they did that. But so Boston ended up with the first subway. You know who has the oldest subway in the world?
London.
You'd think London, right?
Tokyo.
Usually it's London. When in doubt, say London. A lot of stuff happens there. If it's not London, it's Paris. Okay? So who has the oldest subway in the world?
Tokyo.
Budapest. Who would have thought? Budapest in Hungary. It's amazing. Here's the Boston School of Law, New England School of Law on the left. That was founded in 1908. When it was founded, it was called the Portia School of Law. You know Portia from The Merchant of Venice, The Quality of Mercy, and all that stuff. But it was the first all-woman law school in the United States, and one of very few law schools where women could study for the bar. There was a boarding house over here on the other side of the transportation building. That's where Edgar Allan Poe was born. There's a statue of Poe right on the corner, see him? He's got his suitcase, he's leaving. He hated Boston. He thought it was the most snobbish city in the world, he did. All those upper class, you know, the Brahmins. He always said he was a Virginian. I think we're friendlier now. Here's the public garden on the left. The oldest public botanical garden in the United States. This was all water, okay? All of this was the Charles River. Charles Street was the Charles River till about 1835. The public garden was like a swamp, you know, on a hot day. Ooh, it stank. So the upper classes, some of them, they said, this is hideous. We want one of those botanical gardens like they have in Europe. So they filled it in, they created the public garden. Then they kept going, you know, they build a street every few years. Arlington, Berkeley, Clarendon, Dartmouth, Exeter, Fairfield, Gloucester, Hereford, Ipswich, Jersey, Kilmanrock, all the way to where Fenway Park is. That's all landfill. That's the Back Bay. The Back Bay took about 30 years to fill in. It's a fancy neighborhood today, you know, the Back Bay. The Back Bay was the bay in back of the city. We had the harbor in the front, we had the bay in the back. There's Mrs. Mallard and her ducks. You'll be able to see them when we make the corner. Right down the walkway there. You know, Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCluskey. Mrs. Mallard and her babies, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mac, Knack, a Whack, Pack, and Quack. The official children's book of Massachusetts. It won the Caldecott Award in 1947. Looks like a wedding on the public garden, or at least the pictures anyway. That's pretty neat. Nice to see things coming back to life again. It really is. Here's the Cheers bar on the right. For the big kids, the Bull and Finch, the Cheers bar. Remember Cheers? That was the most popular TV show in America back in the 1980s. It was filmed right here in Boston. Well, the outside was filmed in Boston. The inside was filmed on a set in Hollywood. I don't think anybody will know your name there anymore, but it is a very friendly place. That statue on the left, that's called Cast Thy Bread Upon the Water. It's a nice angel. But that was by Daniel Chester French. Very famous sculptor. He did the Lincoln Memorial, you know, Daniel Chester French. The big statue of Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C. All kinds of monuments on the public garden. There's a tree from almost every state in the United States. It really is nice. You know, if it's nice this weekend, if you have time, you might want to stroll around the public garden. It really is worthwhile. It's just lovely, very tranquil. Commonwealth Avenue on the right is very nice too. That's my favorite street in the city. It's about a mile long. It goes all the way down to Massachusetts Avenue, but it's like a park all the way down. There's all kinds of monuments and trees and things, flowers. But it was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who is probably the greatest landscape architect in American history. You know, Olmsted, he did Central Park in New York. He did Olmsted Park in Chicago. He did Mount Royal up in Montreal. But he did a whole series of parks around Boston called the Emerald Necklace. Boston has parks all the way around it. George Washington on the left, the equestrian statue of General Washington by Thomas Ball, father of our country. He was in Boston about a year at the beginning of the Revolution. He was training the Colonial Army over in Cambridge. The hotel on the right, that's the Newbury Hotel. They just named it the Newbury last year, but it was originally the Ritz. It was the Ritz, you know, when it was first built in the 1920s, and very exclusive. Back when it was the Ritz, if you wanted to get a room there, you had to show your social registry entry. You had to prove your pedigree. Now they do Groupon. It's a different age, you know. Times have changed. This is Newbury Street. This is the main shopping street in the Back Bay. They call this the Gold Block down at this end. It's the really exclusive stores, you know, Tiffany and Armani, stuff like that, Brooks Brothers. The next block they call the Silver Block because it's not as fancy. It's like Victoria's Secret, Sunglasses Hut, you know, stuff like that. Then way down at the end, down by the Berklee College of Music, they have the Vinyl Block, which is the used record stores and the comic book shops and, you know, consignment shops, things like that. So they'd say Newbury Street has something for everybody. It starts with Giorgio Armani, it ends with Salvation Armani down at the other end. So every price range. That's Church of the Covenant. They've got the tallest steeple in Boston, 225 feet high, the Church of the Covenant. It's made out of Roxbury pudding stone, which is pretty rare. It's the official building stone of Massachusetts. It's only found south of Boston. That's the only place they have Roxbury pudding stone. But what always amazes me, you know, when I come to the Back Bay, if we'd been on this duck boat like in, I don't know, 1870, this would have been the middle of the Charles River. We would have been in the middle of the river. This would have all been water. We would have needed a duck boat because about 80% of our tour would have been a water tour back then. That's how extensive the landfill projects were over the years. But the Back Bay took 30 years. It's 15 city blocks. It's like a mile and a half long. It's a mile wide. It goes all the way to Columbus Avenue on the left, and all the way to the river on the right, all the way to Star Road Drive. People always want to know where they get the dirt. You know, it's a lot of dirt. Where'd they get the dirt? They built railroads west of the city into towns like Needham, Canton, Westwood. They brought in a train full of dirt every 45 minutes, 24 hours a day. 30 trains of dirt a day for 20 years. 6 days a week, no Sundays, 6 days a week. They brought down 300,000 pine trees from Maine, you know, big, tall trees, to use as pilings to hold up the buildings, because, you know, the ground was kind of soft because it was landfill. It's an amazing project, it really is. I like this little building on the right. About 1880. It used to be a tavern. Now it's a chocolate shop. They're 2 for $2, you know, depending on the mood you're in. But Burdick, I think, is a New Hampshire company, I believe. But Boston had the first chocolate factory in the United States. That was Baker Chocolate, which was down in Dorchester. But we had the first jelly bean factory too, which was Schraff's. They were the first ones to make jelly beans over in Charlestown. Here's Trinity Church. We're going to go around the square. You'll be able to see it from different sides. Tallest building in the city, the John Hancock Tower. That opened up in 1976. Designed by I.M. Pei and Associates. Just before it opened, the windows started falling out of it.